This evening on The Rock Newman Show, I sit down with former pro baseball prospect James Gardner. Jimmy shares how while in the middle of pursuing pro baseball stardom and a college degree, he was wrongfully convicted of sexual assault and robbery, forcing him to spend nearly 27 years behind bars. Jimmy discusses how a life in prison ripped he and his family apart and how he's now fighting on the front lines for criminal justice reform and compensation in his case. That's coming up right now on The Rock Newman Show. Welcome to The Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University, located in the nation's capital. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. Drafted by the Chicago Cubs after high school, Jimmy Gardner was headed to pro baseball glory with 4 seasons in the minor league under his belt and a degree in business management in reach. Jimmy's future was bright until he was arrested in 1989 for 2 separate counts of sexual assault and robbery. Jimmy went to trial in January 1990, and despite maintaining his innocence, he was found guilty 1 month later and sentenced to 110 years in prison. Gardner spent nearly 27 years in a jail cell before being exonerated when false testimony in his case was revealed. Jimmy joins me now to share how wrongful imprisonment scarred his life and how his traumatic experience drove him to mentor and aid men and women returning home from incarceration. Also joining the discussion is Jimmy's lawyer, A. Scott Bolden, who's leading the charge in Jimmy's civil suit against the West Virginia Court of Claims for his wrongful conviction. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Let me say here at the outset that we endeavored to have your mother to participate in this broadcast, and for a variety of issues, we weren't able to make that happen.
Yes.
I bring that up first because becoming aware of your story touched me in a way and at a very deep place. I was a baseball player.
No doubt.
And unabashedly, I was a mama's boy. And there wasn't much that gave me greater joy than the times that I was able to go see with my mother and eat her food and harass her and have her to tell me that even though I was 40 years old, I was mannish like I was when I was 4 years old. And that kind of constant exchange in adulthood.
Yes.
To think that an innocent man was deprived of his ability to be able to interact with his mother for 27 years, that's what struck me in a deep place. So I want to ask you something before we get into the technicalities of the case.
Mm-hmm.
One, how is your mother?
Oh, she's fine. Miss Gladys Gardner, I talked to her this morning. She's fine. You know, she normally wakes up 6-something every morning.
Yeah.
Has her coffee and breakfast. She's fine. She wished she could have been here, but things just didn't work out.
So what I would like to ask you is if you can share with us and the viewing audience what that was. Just right now, I'm concentrating on the mother-son, son-mother relationship.
Yes.
What that was like being torn away from the woman that gave you life, you knowing
Yes.
that you were innocent.
Yes. I'm gonna try to give it to you from my mom's perspective. After talking with her extensively on the topic, my mother suffered a stroke. You know, she had a lot of stress throughout the years. She actually has a heart condition right now. She's went through a lot of different difficulties. dealing with the absence of me and going through what I had to go through. Our interaction was minimal throughout the years because phone calls cost about $20 a phone call while I was inside. So I didn't want to put that type of pressure on my family. So I only called like once, maybe once a month. You know, and she wanted me to call more, but I just couldn't see myself putting that cost on my mom, my family like that. But it really shook her to the core. And my mother's a very humble and praying woman. She believes in God, and she attends church religiously, and she prays, and she keeps the faith and keeps herself in a positive mental attitude. But however, me being away, she said she just worried. She just worried about what I was getting into, how I was doing, how I was living. And I always tried to share with her that I was okay considering the nature of where I was at. But my mom it was very hard on her. She went through bouts of depression. Like I said, she had the high blood pressure, the stress, and we all know stress kills.
Yeah.
So she went through some stressful times. Like I said, she had the stroke, I believe a couple of strokes throughout the years. And even till today, she's still suffering from the heart condition, and she's from the things that happened during the stroke, slight paralysis in her left arm, stuff like that. I mean, but Mama she's strong.
I want to ask your attorney, A. Scott Bolden. You are representing Jimmy now, wrongful conviction. We'll get into the merits of the case, the technicalities of the case, but I want to ask you something, because part of what I'm imagining that you are doing is that you're saying to the state of West Virginia and the various entities involved, this man has suffered unjustly for 27 years, and so therefore, how do you try to make up? You can never fully compensate for that loss of freedom for 27 years. But just in talking about his mother, when you communicate with authorities, whether you're talking to them, it's in writing or whatever, does the factor of the loss of relationship, the loss of ability to be able to communicate with his mother, does that enter into the equation for you to come up with a formula to ask for a certain amount of money? How does that work? And does that become a factor?
It certainly does. It's not a direct factor. It's not in any law or reg. And quite frankly, in many states where you've been wrongfully charged and incarcerated, they have a formula that is either statutory, that means it's part of the law. In West Virginia, there is no limit, there is no cap. It's up to the claims court, or you can sue various entities in circuit court. So, for example, in our complaint, we don't name a figure. We say what is just, what is right to make him whole and to compensate him for his loss. I thought what you were going to ask me, well, I guess you did, is that what we call indirect damages or tangential damages, vis-a-vis, Jimmy had high blood pressure and had a very stressed life in prison, and he was diagnosed. His doctor saw him and says, you've got high blood pressure. Are you under a lot of stress? He said, yeah, I am. For 27 years, I've been
in prison. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So we certainly comes into the factor of what we're going to argue. But there are buckets of insurance, there are buckets of individuals, there are buckets of law firms who over 27 years failed Jimmy Gardner, right? And so while normally you would, if he were married, you'd have like this loss of consortium claim whereby he should be compensated for that.
Right.
Loss of kinship, as I call it, while it may not be statutory, it certainly is a factor. His stress and health level is a factor. The stress on his family and parents. Now the courts won't define that, but they certainly can take it into consideration. It's not dispositive, but it certainly is relevant and probative and material, and we're certainly going to make an issue of it.
Okay, let's go back, please.
Yes.
When you first became aware that you were a suspect.
Yes.
If you don't mind, take us back.
Okay. I can go back to 1987. I was playing baseball, as we know, in Charleston, West Virginia with the Charleston Whalers. And at this
Chicago Cubs
organization.
minor league team.
Right, Chicago Cubs organization.
Right.
But the name of the team in the city was the Charleston Whalers.
Sure.
And it's an A-ball affiliate. So at this time, some assaults occurred. Sexual assault, robbery, burglary. This occurred on two separate different women. One of the offenses occurred in May, and the other offense occurred a month later in June.
Right.
And I'm playing baseball in this city, me and all the other black guys on the team.
Yeah.
So when these crimes occur, the officers immediately come to the baseball park and they question myself along with, I guess, the 67 other black guys on the baseball team.
Right.
So they question us all about our whereabouts. What have we been doing? Where we stayed? Just asking questions. Would you be willing to cooperate? So we all readily agree.
Right.
I say that happened in. I'm going to say that happened in June, after the second assault.
Let me say something there because I've been obsessed with this. I've reviewed and studied this case obsessively, and from the very beginning,
Yes.
if what I'm reading is correct,
Yes.
both victims said that they were assaulted
Yes.
by a light-skinned black man.
Medium to light. Yes.
You ain't nowhere close to medium, brother.
Nowhere near. Compared to me and Rock.
No, I'm not. and to make it even more egregious, in 1987, I was even darker than I am today, due to the fact that it's the summertime. It's actual. I'm leaving Florida, and it's hot in Florida.
Yeah.
And I go to spring training in Arizona, and it's double the heat.
My Lord.
Then I have an extended spring training,
Yeah.
and I stay out in Arizona. So I stayed out there baking, so to speak, an extended time before I even went to Charleston, West Virginia. I think this was the darkest that I probably was in my entire life. So once I go through the baseball season, I mean it's pictures I got. You can't even see me. All you see is my teeth.
Yeah.
But once I go through the season, you know, that's all we're doing. We're in the sun.
Yeah.
And I'm
Sure.
steadily getting darker and darker and darker and darker.
Yeah.
But to go back to what the women testified to, we find out at trial, and this only happens at trial, that we get the actual police documentation of the lady's testimony. And then we found out about their testimony. That shows that both victims have viewed my photographs a number of times.
Right.
And in no time have either of the ladies identified me as being their assailant. And to go even further, the one victim, Miss Lillian Ruckman, she testifies in the documentation 3 times. She's seen me in 3 different lineups.
Right.
And said Jimmy Gardner's not the guy because of his features, his nose, his lips.
Yeah.
And this was a number of times. This is about 3 times. Now in the Miss Galati, in that case, I never get any documentation, but I only find out through discovery, going to the grand jury minutes, and I saw where, and during the grand jury minutes, the officer testified that Miss Galati had viewed my photograph a number of times. But they said from the viciousness of the crime, she wasn't capable of identifying anything. Well, I never got those reports for some reason. Even today, I still don't have those reports because I believe those reports say that she probably identified me as not being the perpetrator.
Right.
Because both of these women are saying it's a light to medium complexion African American. And this is daylight in the one case. And I think it was dark in the other case, but the lady's lights may or may not have been on, but she got a good view.
Right.
So she sees her perpetrator.
Yes.
And says the light to medium complexion guy.
Right.
And we all know I've never been to the degree of light skin or medium. This is the most medium I am today.
Yeah.
This is after 20-something years of being in West Virginia on top of a mountain.
Right.
In snow and in cold
Okay.
weather.
Okay. So so they come and they interview you and some of your teammates.
All the blacks.
Okay.
all the
Okay.
blacks.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, I'm thinking this is in June, July.
Right.
They take those guys down to the police station, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
I know Larry and Tim and Doyle, a few other guys.
Right.
But a couple of those guys are light skinned,
Uh-huh.
and then a couple of them aren't light skinned.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I go to the police station. They come get me like early August
Mm-hmm.
and take me to the police station.
Mm-hmm.
And I give fingerprint photos. I give mug shots, and I go through an hour and a half of interrogation.
Right.
And after that interrogation is over, the chief of police tells me at that time, nothing matches. You're free to go.
Okay.
That's when I leave.
Uh-huh.
And that's in 1987, July.
Right.
I don't hear back again from Charleston Police Department or detectives until maybe May of 1989.
Right. A couple of years
couple
later.
years later, yeah.
Mhm.
And they're saying at this time, your fingerprint matches from the crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I don't know it was a thumbprint at the crime scene for 2 years.
Right.
Now it's my left middle fingerprint, allegedly, at the crime scene.
Uh-huh.
Then as I read documentation, I see where they say we made a mistake in 1987. We just missed his print, or we didn't have anyone who was skilled in taking his print. But now it matches.
Yeah.
But it's no longer a thumbprint in blood. It's a left middle fingerprint in blood.
Mm-hmm.
So from that, I said, man, it's ridiculous. This is incredible. I said, first off, I'm not in the person's house. My fingerprint shouldn't have been in that person's house. They said, well,
Yeah.
how did it get there? I said, you can tell me better than I can say because
So
you
this crime took place 2 years before what you're talking about right now.
Yes.
Now they're coming back to you and giving notice
Yes.
to you
Yes.
that they made some mistakes earlier on.
Yes.
And now you're identified as a result of a print.
right.
So Scott, let me ask you, in terms of police procedure, where does this fall in your experiences of cases being bungled? So right now, they haven't found a perpetrator. I'm assuming there's a lot of pressure in the community for them to find out and identify who did this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as a former prosecutor from New York, let me be real clear with you. Prosecutors and the FBI and the police, they make mistakes. Doesn't mean the case can't go forward, but they make mistakes. Here, you had a lot of stop signs, okay? First stop sign was the two women couldn't positively identify, we know now, couldn't positively identify Jimmy Gardner.
Right.
The descriptions didn't match, the fingerprints didn't match, and there's a lot of serology that is going on at the scene.
Serology, what's serology?
Well, that's they're picking prints, they're taking blood samples, they're taking semen samples, and they're trying to identify. You don't get into the DNA till later,
Yeah.
but if they can get a match,
Yeah.
which is why going to the baseball team and rounding them up, who are all African American players,
Yeah.
to see if there's a match. Now, all of these guys, including Jimmy, voluntarily submitted it because they knew they hadn't been at the apartment and they
Right.
knew that they were innocent.
Right.
The scary part and the dangerous part of all of this is that while they knew they weren't there and they were innocent, Jimmy still, not his other baseball player, but Jimmy still got caught up.
Yeah.
Most people think, I haven't done it, I wasn't there, I'll
Yeah.
cooperate and give
Yeah.
you all the samples that you want.
Right.
Here, that was their downfall. That was his downfall because now they had his samples and now they could falsify reports, falsify tests, and fit his DNA, or rather put his serology
Yeah.
results into what was at the crime scene versus comparing them and saying, hey, there's not a match here.
Okay, let me bring up a name. I don't have enough discipline to wait further into the interview. I got to bring this up right now. There is a name, and it's Zane.
Yes.
What you're talking about is having the prosecutor's team, police, to create a narrative that makes him guilty.
Yes.
I don't know if I remember the chronology when I bring up this guy's name, Zane, but he is one. I'll tell my viewing audience out here, and perhaps you could even elaborate more. Yeah. But there is a gentleman who is a part of the prosecution team. He's a state employee hired by
State police, serologist.
Yeah, yes. who was found to routinely falsely testify in West Virginia.
Yeah.
At some point, he went to Texas,
Yes.
and he got a job in Texas.
Yes.
And time and time again, they saw some untoward kind of behavior taking place. He was investigated and found to, again, routinely, Zane,
Yes.
routinely falsify
Yes.
evidence. He came back in West Virginia, hired him again after they knew that he had been found guilty in Florida, in Texas, of doing this. So, at the time we're talking about right now, this 2-year span, was he a part of that investigation during that time, or did he come in later?
He was actually a part of the investigation during that period, from 87 to 89. Zane, actually, Fred Salem Zane is his name, and he was a West Virginia state trooper and chief serologist for the state of West Virginia. Well, in that time, in 1987, he was the chief guy. He was working at the lab at the West Virginia Division of Public Safety, and he actually did some of the forensic work, and some other serologists did part of the forensic work also.
Right.
But Zane stayed on until 1989. He left in 1989, I believe the beginning of 1989. He left and took a job in, I believe, San Antonio, Texas. And it was over a dispute of him becoming director or something of that nature.
Right.
I guess he felt he had put his work in and he should have gotten the position, but he didn't get the position. So the dispute landed
He's
Zane.
helped this state
That's right.
convict a whole
That's
lot
right.
of people
That's
that,
right.
Exactly.
that quite possibly were innocent.
That's right.
And in Jimmy's case, like so many other cases that have either had to be retried or thrown out, there were something like 130 or 140 cases that ultimately had to be re-reviewed once the state Supreme Court's investigation turned up the falsities and the falsehoods that were being perpetrated by Zane. If you think about Jimmy's case, the only evidence really against Jimmy was the false evidence and the false serology reports put forth by Zane. They didn't, in the second case, they didn't, the complaining witness didn't even testify. And both complaining witnesses who were the victims of these awful crimes, neither one of them could positively identify Jimmy as part of the police investigation.
Right.
That's what we call Brady material. It tends to show exculpatory, that you're more it exculpates you as opposed to inculpates you. That was never turned over to him or his defense attorney during his trial. And beyond that, with that flimsy evidence, it went to the jury. He was convicted for one. He was found not guilty of another. But here's the thing. On top of all of that, right, he was sentenced for one case, 110 years of incarceration, right? Never been in trouble before vis-a-vis a felony or a misdemeanor. He had some youth offender stuff down in Florida, but this was essentially his first conviction and was sentenced to 110 years, which essentially was a life sentence for a first conviction for a sexual assault. Now, I'm not devaluating the important, the magnitude of that crime and on the crime victims, but if you got the wrong man, you have the wrong man. That's worse. That's just as bad at least.
So, I understand there were some interesting dynamics at the time of the trial and sentencing, where you, in your defiance of knowing that you were innocent, you took the initiative wisely or unwisely of challenging the judge. What the judges, can you take us into that courtroom that day and give us a sense of what was being said, how you responded, and why you responded the way you did?
Well, first off, I was 23 years old at the time, and I tell you, it was a very disturbing time for me. You know, it was very emotional. And you know, I just had kind of like a little rage inside afterwards. But at
not a whole lot of rage.
Well,
it was growing.
It was growing, yes.
Okay.
But at sentencing time, after I got convicted, you know, I was kind of shell shocked. I still didn't believe that I was convicted of that.
Yeah.
But anyhow, sentencing came a month later. And by the time I get back to the courtroom in front of Paul Zacabe Jr.'s court,
The judge.
the judge, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and he asks me before sentencing, Mr. Gardner, is there anything you'd like to say prior to me sentencing you? And, you know, I was in my feelings. Things I said then, I definitely wouldn't say today, knowing better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you know, being in my feelings, I told the judge, yes, there is, and you know, I kind of hot-headedly told the judge, F you, and the prosecutor, and all the, you know, everyone involved in
This
this.
is the judge that
Yeah.
had convicted you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This is prior to sentencing,
Right.
which, like I said, was a bad idea. But
Right.
I mean, you know, when you're in your feelings, you're in your feelings.
Yeah.
But I said F you and the prosecution and everyone involved in this charade of a conviction, this kangaroo court.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you're wearing the wrong robe, and you don't have your white hat on.
Mm.
And you know, it was a bad thing. I know today it was not good because he said the judge said it gives me the pleasure. He said, you are a menace to society, and it gives me the pleasure to sentence you to the maximum amount on all charges. And after he finished, I ended up with 110 years. And it's, you know, it's ironic because they offered me 10 years, and because I exercised my constitutional right to proceed to trial,
Right.
I get 110.
Yeah.
But that was a rough time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to top that off, I go back to jail and someone has broken into my property and took my property. Oh, it was crazy. That was a crazy day. Yeah, that was a crazy day.
So you go back to jail the day you were sentenced.
Right, I go back
and
over.
found that you had
Yeah.
you felt extraordinarily violated in
Yes,
the courtroom.
yes.
You go back into your jail
Whew.
cell, and you're violated once again.
Yeah, my family photos are gone. My telephone book with my family numbers is all torn out, and yeah, that was rough.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you,
Yeah.
this guy who's the state police, Zane.
Yes.
He's the chief of serology.
Astrology, right.
Was there a sense then or any time afterwards about he and the judge, the prosecutors, having any sort of special relationship? I'll put it that way.
Well, during trial, you know, during my trial, I had my notepad and I filled that pad up. I was writing down everything that every witness said, and I tried to keep up with everything the prosecution was saying. I filled that notepad up, and I made copies of it afterwards. But during the trial, you know, I was catching this Zane guy in so many lies, because he'd actually have a chalkboard saying what numbers and what the characteristics were of the perpetrator versus me. And he talked to the jury. He had the chalkboard here, and he'd have his hands with his cards over here, and he's saying one thing over here, and it's not adding up on this side.
Yeah.
And I'm telling my lawyer he's lying because he's saying one thing and representing another. I said, and I got my chart written down just like he has his board. I got it written down on my chart, and I'm showing him, and we're kind of catching Zane a little bit in some of his lies. And that was pretty interesting. And the same thing with the fingerprint person, the fingerprint guy. You have these individuals talking about, well, this fingerprint matches, and the blood. And then Zane testifies to the blood in the fingerprint being human blood, but he couldn't get a characteristic. He couldn't get a type, ABO. And we're like, well, how is that possible?
Right.
You got blood. You know it's human blood. You got a type.
Okay, let me ask you. So you go back, you find out that you've been violated there again.
Yes.
At some point, I don't know whether this is the next day or whatever, the reality of the situation, I'm going to ask you, when did the reality of you've been sentenced to 110 years, when did that set in? Did you ever accept
Never.
that this was going to be your fate? You're going to be in jail the rest of your life?
Never. And that's a key point. That number that the judge gave me could have been 1,000,000 years.
Right.
It wouldn't have made a difference.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, whatever number that he would have came out of his mouth and said, this is what we're sentencing you to.
Yeah.
And in my mind, all I'm going to do is fight for my life, whether it's life without 200 or 300 years, makes
Yeah.
no difference.
Yeah.
I know I'm in a fight for my life, and that's all I'm focusing on. I mentally blocked out the number of years, the conviction,
Yeah.
except for me fighting for my life.
Right.
And I mean, it's a different level of going through the mental.
Oh.
You know, I read all type of powerful books,
Yeah.
and I went to another level myself, reading Dr. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. You know, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Some powerful thinking books. You know, and
So you had to get into a space
yes, I did.
where it was non-existent what the judge
Made no difference.
had put upon you.
Made no difference.
Your existence was an existence.
That's right.
Not thinking about how long you had to serve.
No.
Just focusing every day, all the time,
On what I got to do to get out of
on
there.
what you have to do to get out. Okay, now, so you're there. You think that's your mindset.
That's my mindset.
But nevertheless,
Yes,
you are captive. You're captive
physically.
physically
That's it.
in West Virginia, and you have to abide by rules and regulations
That's right.
of the penal system. Tell us about that experience, this sort of your day-to-day experience.
I realized that, I'm glad you brought that point. I realized that any move that I made, anything that I did that could have been detrimental to me progressing, being able to get to the law library, being able to make copies, being able to go research, anything that would have taken me away from my filings, the law library, getting any type of legal knowledge would have been detrimental to me going home. So I had to really go to a whole nother mental level of whatever is existing in here, I got to deal with and try to deal with without allowing it to succumb me in here. And that's a
To
real,
make you act in a way
exactly. That can
That
be
that was detrimental.
detrimental to me getting released. And I say that because going to lockup for fighting or whatever could cost me 90 days.
Yeah.
And if I get into incidents, which I did in the beginning, I might be sentenced to a year or two on lockup. You know, I go to lockup in at the end of 92, get off in 94, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I had to learn from these encounters.
Yeah.
And in doing that, you have to take more from individuals. You have to not allow things to bother you, and you have to keep focused. My thing was I kept in my mind every day, I'm trying to make it back home to my family.
Yeah.
I'm getting back to my mom, my brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
you know, my family members, my dad, everybody. I'm trying to make it home. And I got to do everything that I can to stay on the right path.
Yeah.
And if I divert too far, if it goes to a level of, if I kill somebody in here,
Yeah.
my fate is over.
Yeah.
And if I get killed in here, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
so you gotta stay flexible,
Yeah.
but you can't bend either way because you gotta stay on this path.
Yeah.
And thank God for keeping me on that straight path.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me ask you, if you would tap into some of your worst moments or your worst moment. Before you answer that, because I don't know what you would say,
Yeah.
but I have come across a conversation that you had where you talked about, I don't know if this was, you were in solitary confinement,
Yeah.
but you were like freezing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst I've been in my life. I was on lockup for I got into an incident with a guy, and I got sentenced to some years on lockup.
Years?
Yes.
And Jimmy, when you say lockup, what do you mean?
Lockup is solitary confinement.
Okay.
Right.
That's when prisoners violate the rule infractions,
Yeah.
and or either they're placed over there for security reasons.
Yeah.
You know, the lockup is a place where you're in isolation 24 hours a day,
Yeah.
sometimes 24, but mostly 23 hours a day,
Uh-huh.
because you have an hour to go to recreation, and with that hour for recreation, I would always go to the law library.
Mhm.
And the law library, you got an option. You can go work out on the yard with the weights, or go to the law library.
Yeah.
So some guys chose over here, some guys chose over here. I chose to go to that law library and read and all that. But while I was on lockup in 1993, it was the coldest I've ever been in my life, because this place, Moundsville, West Virginia, and the prison is called The Walls,
Yeah.
and it's like a big dungeon.
Yeah.
It had already been declared unlivable, and it was condemned.
Yeah.
So they were just waiting to move out of there. And
Yeah.
in fact, we moved out March of 1995.
Mhm.
But in 1993, I believe it's February of 1993, it's cold.
Yeah.
And all the windows in lockup are knocked out from an earlier riot in 1986. They never fixed the windows. So it's cold, and the snow's coming in, and I'm right, my cell I'm on like the 5th tier.
Yeah.
And all those windows up there are knocked out, and that snow is coming in, and this place is full. It's just all steel.
So where you're being housed,
Yes.
the windows are out
Yeah.
and snow's coming in.
Oh, it's coming in, and it's just freezing. It's freezing.
Yeah.
And I got on layers of clothes. I got sheets and blankets on the door. I'm not getting up for breakfast. Matter of fact, that's the first time I ate oatmeal in my life, 1993.
Yeah.
So hungry.
Yeah.
But my toilet water is frozen.
Oh my God.
It's ice.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's literally ice.
Yeah.
And what I had to do in order to use the toilet, I had to use my shank and crack the ice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, literally, crack the
And
ice.
you're having to be there 23 hours of the day or 24
Oh yeah,
hours.
23, yes. And you know, I cracked the ice just to use the toilet, you know, and at this time, I mean, lockup was a little worse than the regular population.
Yeah.
And I say that because it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Everyone has protection.
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned my steel.
Yeah.
Everybody has steel,
Uh-huh.
literally.
Uh-huh.
There is no officers. The officers in lockup, they have guns. It could be an officer over here, officer over there. They got pump shotguns,
Yeah.
and they're shooting before asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And at this time, there's a lot of stabbing going on. It's a lot of gang things happening.
Yeah.
You know, you got the AB, you got
Oh,
different
man,
you
oh,
got
man.
different gangs, and you got different guys calling out different hits.
Yeah.
You know, so you gotta be on point at all time.
Yeah.
So it's a stabbing going on almost every day.
Yeah.
And I still hear that shotgun in the back of my head going click,
Yeah.
boom.
Yeah.
And this is still ringing.
Yeah.
Because when that shotgun goes off and hits,
Yeah.
you got these like bullets, these fragments flying.
Man, I gotta ask you, you're in this frozen box,
Yeah.
getting colder all the time because the windows are out, the heat's not working properly, your toilet water is frozen. Did it ever occur to you that you just might want to quit? I mean,
Oh no.
so when you're there, and in that conversation I heard, you know, you eloquently talked about how you could hear, and you obviously were feeling your teeth uncontrollably chatter.
I mean, I've never been that cold in my life. And I mean, I'm so cold, I'm not getting up for breakfast, lunch, or dinner for like a day or two at least,
Yeah.
because I know I had to eat oatmeal, and
Yeah.
I wrote it down in my journal. This
Yeah.
is the first time I'm eating oatmeal in my life,
Yeah,
because I mean, it's so cold that I'm not trying to move.
yeah,
But I mean, that's an understatement. I mean, it was myself and a guy by the name of Tiny. We're the only ones yelling. We're the only ones yelling, man, you guys got to do something about this.
I was going to ask you,
man.
man.
I'm yelling.
I'm
screaming.
Do you say, do you
I'm
beg
screaming.
for some mercy?
I'm screaming.
Yeah.
Me and Tiny, Alvin Gregory, I am screaming.
Saying what?
Man, get some heat back here. Fix these windows. Man, let us out of this situation. This is too cold over here. It's freezing.
Yeah.
Toilets are frozen.
Yeah.
I mean,
so was that, did you experience that over a course of a few days, a few weeks, or?
oh, that went on for the winter. That went on for the winter in West Virginia. Yeah.
Scott Bolden, I don't know if you've heard that story, if he's shared that with you.
I have.
As the attorney, again, part of what you're going to do now, I'm sure, is as you do, like a pit bull, go for the gusto.
Yes, sir.
Is that kind of inhumane existence that he was subjected to? Is that a factor as you go and appeal and apply for him to get monetary compensation?
It's a factor, but it's more than a factor. It's a fact that supports the process of him being made whole of what he had to endure. Because when I talk about buckets of wrongdoing, it doesn't stop with being charged and prosecuted and convicted. Over 27 years, what he had to endure, this is a really important fact to it, and something you can't really get around. And it's in our complaint of what he had to endure, not just with his family, but this lockup that he keeps talking about, the manifestations of it, the impact on him psychologically, physically, and the experts who are going to testify on his behalf, not just from an economic standpoint of economic loss, but psychological loss and what he's had to endure. He'll be interviewed, if you will, and then the results of that interview and the experts' report, more than likely, whatever form we're in, is going to be significant and dispositive of how you match that up with how you make him whole. You're never going to make him whole. That's a factor, and it certainly is facts that the court, any court, will have to look at.
Have you, in your representation, yet made an inquiry, made contact with any of the entities in West Virginia that you're going after?
Yes.
Any response?
Yes.
Can you share anything?
They have filed and will file opposition motions. They will try to pay as little as possible. No state agency and no private entities, because they're buckets of people with exposure. We just got started with the state of West Virginia. But the initial response is to oppose compensating him at a significant level. I'm not surprised at that, but you would think just one time in his life, you know, he's fought to get out of jail for 27 years, right? Despite Zane, he still remained in prison. He didn't get a habeas corpus hearing at the state level, so he fought for 27 years to get out. Now he's going to have to fight to be made whole. He's going to have to fight for justice. And given those 27 years, you think somebody, some entity would say, enough with this. Let's resolve this. Let's do the right thing, and let's move on from this awful past and history. And initially, at least initially now, that has not been the state's response.
The more I read about this, and I'm sure that there are other cases that maybe are similar, maybe are as egregious, but I almost saw this as the perfect, or what I say, most imperfect microcosm of the worst of the criminal justice system. Because part of what happened, and again, if my research is correct, you're not getting habeas corpus was the longest of any prisoner that I kept researching. I couldn't find anyone who was denied as you were. So, you know, I'm far from a legal expert. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, that's another fact that he ought to be compensated for. 3 years after he went to prison, they knew Zane was dirty. The Supreme Court of West Virginia did an independent investigation and threw out all of the serology results conducted by Zane.
Yeah.
So they knew he was dirty. And he filed on his own state habeas corpus proceedings.
He being Jimmy.
He
filed on his
being
own.
Jimmy,
Yeah.
and he still never got an evidentiary hearing. And as a matter of fact, he filed for a federal habeas corpus hearing at a time where 20 years later, when he actually statutorily was not entitled to one. But because he had been in legal purgatory for so long,
Oh, my
a
God.
federal district court judge looked at his record and said, I'm going to take this case up because of the extraordinary circumstances. And it was at the federal court level where they granted this habeas corpus proceeding, evidentiary hearing, found in his favor, and in a scathing opinion, that is a published opinion, argued that he had not only been in legal purgatory because of the state of West Virginia ignoring his state claims while he was in prison, but that he was going to he would have to either be retried or let go. After that, the state prosecutors in West Virginia still didn't let go. They still planned on retrying him. And for, I believe it was 1 to 3 months between the habeas corpus, the federal habeas corpus order, continued to prepare a new case against him.
Please correct me if I am wrong here, or feel free to jump in. A judge said that you should be released
Or retried.
or retried. The prosecution still, just last year, behaved in a manner
Yes.
to say we're going to retry you. But they said more. They said they gave you the opportunity to plead guilty for a few years. Walk us through that insanity. And I am supposed to remain calm, cool, and collected here. So let me let you walk through what I think I read.
Now the state of West Virginia gave me an opportunity for a plea, the first plea in 1989, when they offered me 10 years to
Right.
plead guilty to a lesser charge
Yeah,
and drop all other charges.
right.
And I said I wouldn't plead guilty to one day, less than 10 years. I didn't do the crime.
Yeah,
So we fast forward to 2016, after I've been released on April 1st, 2016. Now the state is in their process of retrying, and this process took 5 months. They went 5 months
Yeah.
from April
yeah,
1st to September 7th.
yeah,
We're in preparation for a trial.
right.
In the midst of this, they're coming with plea offers. We'll drop this charge, plead guilty to this. And
Drop this charge, please guilty to this, and then serve some more time.
and then serve some more time. Then they come with a plea agreement. We'll drop all charges except the sexual assault. Time served, and he can just register as a sex offender.
Plead guilty to that.
Plead guilty to that.
Now, Rock, if I may, because this is really important. I'm sorry, Jimmy, go right ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
In 2016, right,
Yeah,
they have 2 scathing reports against Zane.
right.
They know Zane is dirty. They know the 2 women in the 2 cases
Yeah.
cannot fully identify him.
Yeah.
They know that the fingerprint and the blood evidence has been falsified or has major problems with it. They know he has served, he's been incarcerated for 27 years.
Yeah.
And in 2016, once he's released, the state prosecutors are still plea bargaining with him
And trying to put him back in
and
jail
trying
again.
to put him back in jail. That is unethical. And as a former prosecutor, your job is to do justice, and that spells nothing but injustice here. And those are the facts, right? We're not creating any
Yeah.
emotional connection to Jimmy.
Yeah.
These are just facts
Yeah.
that can't be outrun
Yeah.
or undone
I am
by
telling you that
prosecutors.
I'm telling you,
or the
as I
state.
was trying to we're trying to determine, we have to do this before we do a show like this. We have to try to go through as much of the evidence as we possibly can. And when I read objective factual, verifiable information that prosecutors in 2016 kept coming to you saying, we're going to retry you, but you can avoid a trial if you plead guilty to these things here, and you might get 5 years, you might get 8 years, you might get 10 years. Your steadfast position was, if I get a day, I'm not pleading guilty to anything. It doesn't matter. And to show the ultimate vulgarity and bogus role they were playing, once you kept refusing, they then threw in the towel.
But I want to backtrack a little bit. Even in that process, once they said the state said they were going to retry, I had the top lawyers in West Virginia actually, in preparation of being appointed on the case, they met with me and said, we recommend that you plead guilty because we're not going to represent you if you go to trial. We don't think that you can go to trial and win, so we won't represent you. And this is two of the top firms in the state of West Virginia. And these guys come at me and I say, well, I'm not pleading guilty, and it was nice meeting you. And I let them go on about their business.
Yeah,
And the same thing happens with an attorney right here in Washington, D.C. He's trying to come on the case to represent me. And he recommends, I recommend that I don't want to see you go back in. I recommend you go ahead and plead guilty, time served, and just, get on out of there. And I said, well, you're not hearing me. I didn't do the crimes.
Yeah.
You want me to plead guilty after all these years, and I won't plead guilty to anything.
Yeah.
Well, I can't represent you.
Yeah.
They walk away.
Yeah.
Attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. You give me $100,000, and we'll try to get you the best representation you can get.
Yeah.
And we'll see what we can do. I mean, it's a lot. All these things are coming at me.
Yeah.
But no one's hearing, I'm not guilty.
Yeah. Scott, you were going to say something because, man, we're getting too close to the end. I want to come back and ask you about something.
Buckets of egregious misconduct by the prosecution, and in fact, many defense lawyers, at least in my opinion. I love this profession, but to conduct themselves that way post his release just simply made no sense. And that's the only thing I was going to add. And by the way, I wasn't the D.C. lawyer that urged him to plea either. I came after all of this.
So I have a question. Are you a man of faith?
Oh, without my faith, I'm nothing. Yeah, I give all praise to God, and the one thing that I can say to everyone, never give up hope, never give up faith. My faith brought me through the worst of the worst times. If I wasn't praying, I was thinking about praying. and I watched all of my dudes around me either die, go home, or eventually get moved to a different institution. You get friends while you're inside. And I mean, most guys around me, I'm talking 20, 30, 40, 50, then hundreds. Then, I'm watching hundreds of guys die. So I'm keeping my faith every day. My faith is everything. I was asked the question inside, upon getting out, what's the worst thing that you think can happen to you? I said, if I lost my faith, that's the worst thing that can happen to me. Because then the foundation, once the foundation is gone, everything falls. But my faith is everything. My faith in God, and I walk that, and I try to continue to maintain that relationship out here. And I'm moving fast out here, but I still keep myself grounded. No alcohol, no drugs, not involving myself in sexual activities with every woman. Keeping myself just grounded in my tenets.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that, you know, people say, man, you know, you look this way, you look that way. Well, I'm not polluting my body.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not indulging in acts that are no good for my health.
Yeah.
I try to remain mentally, physically, and spiritually on point. Sure, I'm gonna drink 110, 120 ounces of water a day.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do my best to stay healthy,
You know, I
as
asked
I've always
you that
done.
question. I asked you that question
Yeah.
because what you endured, it takes more than just the human constitution to bring you through.
Sure.
And I'm glad I asked that question
Sure.
because what you just said is you stood on a faith and you stood on a God. There is a God force that is within you that leaps out. Folks, Jimmy,
One more thing.
maybe on the next show.
Oh,
Maybe on the next show. I got to wrap this right now.
okay.
Thank you for this evening looking into us. What a story. For more information on this program or any other program produced by WHUT, go to WHUT.org. Goodbye, and let this man and God bless you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks, Scott.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.